Now we're rolling. Damage Plan MMA podcast. I'm Jason. As always, I don't have my co-host again today. He's at home taking care of his brand new baby with his lovely wife. So I brought on Mr. Blake O'Rulian to join me. Blake, what's up, man?
How's it going? Super happy to be here. Even more excited to be here with one of the biggest up-and-coming middleweights in the state of Utah, Andrew Mikkelsen. What's going on, Andrew?
What's up, guys? Not too much. Thanks for having me.
We are super excited to talk to you. I mean, you have a very interesting storyline coming into this fight just next week. You've got a 35-day turnaround coming off of your last fight against Sebastian Mordecai. How have your last 5 weeks been?
Last 5 weeks have been kind of crazy, but in a good way. For the Mordecai fight in particular, we had gone through a few different opponents that had, I guess, verbally committed, but for whatever reason, something fell through on their end. And so Mordecai didn't even really get booked until we were a couple weeks out from the fight. So I'm super grateful for him. I mean, obviously for him, he's traveling, out of state and taking a fight on short notice against a guy like me who, I don't know what a matchup with me really does for him and his career, but I guess it's just experience, right? And so I was just grateful that we were able to get something booked and grateful that Sebastian was willing to step in. But following that fight, I don't know. I felt like there were a few things I could have and should have done different in that fight. And I obviously walked out of that fight with like 0 damage. And so that night I walked up to Zach and just said, hey, you guys have that Maverick Center card next month. I want on it. Obviously, it's, I know as a matchmaker, it can be hard. There's a lot of moving parts, but I'm grateful that he was able to find me an opponent and get me a quick turnaround. So.
Well, to kick things off, I mean, you are the number 7 middleweight in the entire state of Utah. So you're definitely no scrub to Sebastian Mordecai or anyone, as shown in that fight. You mentioned that you didn't want to sit on that loss. How do you gauge or how do you deal with your competitive nature? Do you find it as one of your greatest strengths, or have you found that it's been difficult to deal with at times? Do you like being as competitive as you are?
I think having a competitive attitude is an asset. I think it's something that motivates guys to train harder, to expand their skill set. For me, the difficulty is losing. Like, I hate losing a lot more than I love winning. So I think sports psychology mode, like, you need to kind of get in the right mindset. It's not your plan to not lose. You're going out there to win. But I mean, I've experienced that in my first couple fights. Coming out of the win, of course, I'm pumped up and excited, but the sting of a loss is a little bit more intense than like the sweetness of victory. So, but yeah, I mean, I do consider myself competitive. That was a big reason why I walked up to Zach after the Mordecai fight and just said, get me on whatever you can as soon as possible. Like, I want to get back in sooner rather than later. So.
And so in that 35 days, that's 5 weeks of time. I want to just ask you, how much can change? How much can you work on in that short amount of time? And what have you been working on and trying to improve on? I saw you've been working with Justin Ruiz.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Obviously, 35 days isn't a huge amount of time to really make significant changes to your game, right? So I would say that I'm basically what I was 35 days ago. Hopefully I'm just a little bit tighter, cleaned up some of those techniques, and I'm still really, really new to the sport, to be honest. So for me, the learning curve is a lot steeper than a lot of other people. So I feel like very, very fortunate. Obviously at Agima, we have some awesome coaches, world-class guys in Court McGee and Dane that are running practices and coaching us, the fighters. But also there's other resources here locally that I've tried to take advantage of. You mentioned Justin Ruiz. He's like royalty in wrestling, especially here in the Utah area, but not even just in Utah. Like, if you ask people who are familiar with the wrestling game, then they'll know Justin Ruiz and respect his career, his body of work in the wrestling space. So he's just a really, really generous guy. Obviously, there's so many people that he could be spending time with and helping. I just feel fortunate that he's found it in his heart to let me come over and work some stuff with him here and there. So kudos to Justin Ruiz, top-notch dude.
Andrew, was that something that you figured out after that last fight with Sebastian, was reaching out to somebody like Justin with the wrestling credentials he's had to help improve your game in that area?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, doing a little bit of research on Sebastian, we knew that he had a really great wrestling background. From what we gathered, it seems like that guy's been wrestling since he was in diapers, right? He's got some good wrestling accolades. I don't have a background in wrestling except for a couple months wrestling in middle school, which you can't really even count realistically. So for us preparing for that fight, it's like there's not a whole lot we can do in the next couple months to close the gap in wrestling experience.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you've ever got on the mats with Court, you'll get some experience in wrestling real quick. And Dane's going to be a little bit more submission minded, but Court the Crusher as well. I mean, the mix between both of those guys and learning from them, I felt like, given my limited exposure to the sport and not having a ton of time training, I felt like I was in about as good of a spot to be prepared for an opponent like Mordecai as I could hope to be. But everybody saw that fight. Like, there's clearly a gap there in wrestling experience. So for me, that just lit kind of a fire. It's like there are a few different areas where if I could improve just even a couple of percentage points, maybe that fight ends differently and maybe it's a different result on the record there. So that was part of me kind of reaching out to Justin Ruiz and seeing if there'd be anything that we could work out to where I might be able to pick his brain and get some work in with him. And fortunately for me, he's a great dude, really generous, and was willing to help. So
it's awesome.
You mentioned when you fought Sebastian, we've talked since the fight, actually, for everyone watching, and you mentioned that you knew Sebastian had some national recognition. How nervous were you going into that fight? And do you think that played into it at all? This is my last question about Sebastian, and then we're going to move into this next week. I apologize.
You skipped a little bit. Can you ask the question one more time?
Oh, of course. So you talked to me. We've talked since the fight, and you mentioned how you knew that Sebastian had national recognition. What were your nerves like, and do you think that affected you in any way? Were you thinking about how great of a fighter he was, or anything like that going into it?
Obviously, like, you can't read that online or see that without it kind of being something in the back of your mind, right? It's impossible to forget what you've seen on the guy. So I think that there was a little bit of intimidation there, but not really. Like, I think for the most part, it was more excitement for the opportunity, right? We've got great fighters and great MMA talent here locally in Utah. But if we can pull in some outside competition that has sort of national recognition, kind of, national type accolades, for me personally, it's a really good measuring stick. Like, hey, I've been training this long. I've fought against these types of competitors. This is how I've done and how I've performed. Now I get to test my skills against somebody like Sebastian and see really where I'm at. It's going to be a great learning experience, win or lose. And the wrestling is kind of a component to that. It's like, hey, I've basically have identified a little bit of a deficiency there. And now I'm going to attack that weakness and hopefully turn it into a strength. So yeah, like slightly intimidating, but not really. More kind of exciting, like cool to have the opportunity, cool to have the shot to compete against a guy like him.
Yeah, so moving on now finally into a little bit more about Dominico McIntosh. We've talked about the fact that you have a 35-day turnaround. Dominico has a 36-day turnaround. So you fought that Saturday, he fought that Friday, but you didn't know that when you accepted this fight. Where does that confidence come from, that grit to just go, I don't care who I fight. I just want to take another fight?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't really care what the turnaround time looks like for guys. It seems like he's a guy that wants to become more and more of an active fighter and get more and more experience, kind of like all of us, right? So, yeah, I wasn't aware that he was coming off a quick turnaround. To be honest, I don't really even think of that going into this fight. I'm not sure that it makes much difference. Um, Really, I'm just excited to have a matchup. In the past, we've had difficulty teeing up an opponent, and I get it. People, it's amateurs, right? People aren't getting paid to do this.
Yeah.
So there are life conflicts that come up, but it is, I value somebody who's going to sign a bout agreement and then stick to it. And if he's willing to make the trip out to Utah, I know he's based out of Vegas. So if he's willing to come out here and he's willing to take the fight and stand by what he signed on the bout agreement, then I'm just happy to get in there and compete.
You guys also have something in common. You guys both have fought Sebastian. Oh, sorry, there's a little delay there at the end.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, we both fought Sebastian. And again, back to Sebastian and his wrestling background, the fight went fairly similar, I would say, for both of us. So it'll be fun. This will maybe pan out to be a little bit less wrestling heavy and a little bit more of a striking battle.
Nice.
But it's mixed martial arts, right? Just trying to get in there and flow and take the openings as they are presented. So we'll see how this one goes. I'm excited for it.
Andrew, we talk a little bit about your striking, and we talked about it a lot on the broadcast when you fought. The small windows that you had, you really just put on an absolute showcase. It was unbelievable, the damage you were able to land, and just the moments that you did have. Who do you try to emulate your game after? Who do you look up to? Obviously, you have Court Dane over at Agima, but is there anyone up in the UFC or anything like that who you really look up to and try to be like?
That's a tough one because I can't even name my top 5 or top 10 favorite fighters because I love all of them, almost all of them, and for a lot of different reasons. I think I would say no, there's no one individual that I'm trying to emulate. I think I love watching all of the events, not even UFC. I love catching Bellator and PFL events and local pros here. If they're on a Fierce card or if they're on a card that's out of state, I love to just show out and support those guys.
Awesome.
And for me, being kind of new to the game, it's just kind of fun to pick and choose and see different techniques and especially guys that I feel like are maybe coming from an athletic background or sort of have a same body type or movement that I have. It's kind of fun to just sort of pick and choose or glean techniques or things that are working for them in the cage. So, yeah.
Your time as a football player has kind of brought you into this. A lot of the narrative around you has been like, oh, he's the BYU football player. He's the BYU kid. You've got Kyle Griffiths, who's also fighting in a couple of days here on that same card. He's another one of those guys who has that narrative of football player turned fighter. Do you kind of want that narrative to go away as time goes on, as your career moves on? Do you hope to become more of, I am an MMA fighter, I was a football player, or do you still want to be kind of known as the BYU hometown kid who kicked for BYU for so many years?
I don't really care one way or the other. To preface the BYU football, I guess, reputation that I'm associated with, I was a kicker. So a lot of people think football, they think of a safety going out there and laying the wood on somebody or a running back or somebody that required a little bit more athleticism and cojones than maybe the kickers usually get credited for. But as our boy Pat McAfee says, kickers and punters are people too. So and I, along with a couple of the other kickers and punters, tried to maybe get away from like the kicker and punter stereotype, and I guess assume an identity of being more of a football player and less of a specialist that kind of hangs out on the sideline and doesn't do anything until they're called upon. So we took our time in the weight room seriously. On kickoffs, I was fortunate enough to have a special teams coach that kind of saw that I was athletic enough to be involved in the coverage scheme. And so I was able to go out and get some tackles during my career as a kicker, which was always fun.
Nice.
But as far as how that translates to MMA and my identity, I don't really care. I think it's kind of fun to kind of give a nod to my career at BYU. For sure, it's fun when BYU football fans kind of tune in and see how I'm doing or Kyle's doing. I know that Kyle's going to be rolling deep next weekend. I think that he's going to get a lot of coaches and a lot of current players there, as well as other BYU fans. But I mean, yeah, that was a few years ago. I've moved on, and MMA is sort of my new focus right now. So it's fun to think about, but now we're in MMA, baby. We're focused on that.
I love it. I love it. Andrew, is this something that you plan on making you want to make this a career?
It depends on if my wife is going to listen to this podcast or not. If my wife's not listening,
well, we're live, so
hey, I'm just not going to send her the link.
There you go.
My wife is listening. It's strictly a hobby to avoid getting a dad bod. You know, I'll get in there and get some cardio, and then occasionally take an amateur fight just to kind of have some fun with it. Deep down inside, really, I got into it with, hey, I've got a bucket list item. I want to get in and take a sanctioned MMA fight and just see how I do. And I got in for my debut. It went well. And, you know, for fighters that have been in there and had that experience, it's real tough once you've done it and you've kind of felt what it's like, the anticipation and the jitters pre-fight, and then kind of the glory and the celebration after the fight. It's really tough to just do one and done. So I would say that I'm a little bit of an addict now, a little bit of a junkie, and I don't anticipate being done with this anytime soon. I'd love to get a little bit more experience as an amateur, get some more good wins, but it sort of has morphed into less of a bucket list item that I just want to check off, and more of a, I want to see how far I can take my skill set, and I want to see how I could do maybe at a little bit of a higher level. So that's kind of the target that I've circled right now.
Talking about your career, talking about all the things you just said, I'm reminded of your brother, who also had a little bit of an amateur career. Does he ever give you any advice, any, you know, insight into what he dealt with when he was a fighter?
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
I hope not. I was looking forward
to paused.
Yeah,
he paused.
Can hear me still.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, gotcha. Oh no, the Wi-Fi is going out.
Got it. We're back. One that got more experience than I do. He's really, really supportive. He doesn't miss a fight. He is.
Oh man,
no,
it's the Wi-Fi.
I've got full bars here, guys. I'm not sure what's going on.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that.
Oh, you actually look a lot better right now. Whatever just happened, whatever change you made or happened, it's perfect now.
Okay. I'll keep my answer on my brother short. He's an awesome resource to have. Really, really encouraging, very supportive, obviously more experienced than I am. And so it's great to pick his brain, get sparring rounds in with him. You know, and kind of have someone in the immediate family that I can talk about MMA with and also physically practice technique with. So he's awesome to have in my corner.
I appreciate it. Jason, that's all I've got.
The only other question is that I have that you have to answer is, how do you see the fight playing out next weekend, June 25th at the Maverick Center? And you cannot say with your hand raised. You can use a WWE wrestling move. You just can't say with your hand raised.
Okay. I see it being a good fight. I have a ton of respect for my opponent. Seems like he's a really talented, athletic guy that's got a real competitive mindset that he takes into the cage with him. And so I feel like we're kind of cut from the same cloth in that way. And I feel like it's going to be a really good competitive matchup. And I'm excited to just get in there, kind of get into that flow state / that sort of, I guess, war zone state where you kind of just throw for the fences, but under controlled, obviously. I'd really like to see a finish. So
awesome. I love
what
it.
round?
Andrew,
I don't know, but I'd love to get in there and finish.
It's awesome. Andrew, thank you again for joining us today. June 25th, Fierce Fighting Championship number 20 at the Maverick Center. If you do not have your tickets, click the link below. Make sure you click on Andrew's picture. Show support for your local MMA fighters. And we'll see you next weekend. Thanks again, Andrew.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Appreciate it.
We are
Take
out.
care.